Thank you very much once again for joining us here on Live Mint. I wanted to keep the spotlight on the federal government's policies first and ask you a couple of questions. But before that, Finance Minister, what do you think? What's your perspective of the state of the Indian economy? We've seen it's it's 4.1% growth in Q4, less than what we had seen in Q3, 8.7% in FY 21-22. The government of India says we're all prepared to dodge a stagflation and the economy is resilient. What do you think?
Yeah, I wish I shared their optimism. I think when I look at the impact on people's lives, when I look at the extent of joblessness, when I look at what's happening around the country today in reaction to this new scheme, I worry that the chickens are coming home to roost. You know, numbers can be a bit misleading without context. If you look at the plus 8.3%, that's fine, but it's relative to the fact that it was minus 7 point something percent last year. And if you do the math, 100 minus 7 point something percent is 92 point something. 8 point something percent of 92 point something, barely you're back to where you used to be 2 years ago. That's not much, room for great joy, in my opinion. But I would say we have a couple of, positive things for us. We are bouncing back from a pretty unprecedented pandemic. We think that there's hope, of robust recovery even further beyond what we've seen so far. And the broad move to diversify risk away from China and away from even Europe in light of the developments in, Russia and Ukraine are positives for us. The two huge negatives we have, inflation seems to be rampant. And, the RBI, in my opinion, is a bit behind the curve. There was a brilliant article in the Indian Express, maybe a week ago, by one of our economic advisors, Arvind Subramanian, that talks about how the RBI might have diluted its mandate beyond just fighting inflation to many other things. And in the course of that, lost the plot a bit, or found its hands tied a bit. And I think the other is just unemployment, right? I think at the end of the day, we have this huge demographic trend. We have more than any other country, we have that many youth coming into the job market. And it is the, primary kind of ambition or target, or it should be, of a government to provide job opportunities for that many people. And I think that's really not happening. And what we're seeing right now is a consequence of some of those things.
So talking about the inflation numbers, I think it's still about the RBI's band of 4% to 6%. So I think what do you think is the right kind of policy intervention the government can actually adopt at this moment as a finance minister? So what's your take on that? What's your idea?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you find yourself in a very difficult position because, as I've said before, the primary nature of monetary policy is to be battling inflation, right? In that sense, if 4 to 6 was the target, as many have pointed out, the RBI has been lax. We've exceeded the 6% target probably for many months now, 18, 20 months, and they've not acted, right? Because they've diluted their mandate again, where they see themselves as also accountable for boosting growth, also accountable for protecting the rupee's value, also accountable for delivering dividend to the government and all that. And so, it's not done its role properly. But fiscal policies in the short term, particularly in a difficult economy, you don't have a lot of control of fiscal policies that can help reduce inflation, right? That's the nature of government, right? Fiscal policies usually are better at stimulating, and monetary policies are usually better at controlling. That's why you're supposed to have relatively independent organizations. The RBI should not be under the sway of the government of India, or in any country, the federal bank should operate fairly independently. For example, I've just returned from Australia, where I went as a visitor at the request of the government. Among other people, I met a deputy governor of the Reserve Bank of Australia. That day, they had raised the rates for the second time in something like a few weeks, including the first time in the midst of a national election, once in 3-year national election. And so they faced a lot of criticism, but they said, look, our job is not to worry about politics. Our job is to control inflation. And as soon as we see it, we have to raise the rates. Now, if you compare it by that benchmark, the RBI has been so far behind the curve So where does that leave us? I mean, I can find 1,000 reasons why we got here. Where does that leave us? I don't see that the government of India has that much room to tighten fiscal policy, though, it's already bumping up against kind of the limits of its debt capacity and the country's investment grade rating. Though there may be many upsides to tightening it, I don't think politicians in this kind of context with so much joblessness and a very precarious economy, which has barely come back to what it was 2 years ago, I don't think that any politician really has got the stomach to cut the fiscal spending at this point. So really it goes back to the RBI. And the RBI has to bite the bullet, I think, and allow the government to be the fiscal and the expansionary part of this equation, and go back to doing its day job, which it should have been doing all this time, which is to be the monetary tightener to control inflation. It may be a little too late, but they should still try.
Coming to the contentious GST Council meet, which is going to be held next week on 28th in Srinagar, so I'm sure that you'll be attending it. But again, I think it seems like the state seems to have a lot of leverage right now after DYC's judgment. So, and what are your expectations of that? And what's on the agenda? It seems like the GST compensation payouts are going to top the agenda. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you can predict ahead of time that it's going to be a contentious meeting, but you're probably not off. I would say that, you see, the compensation is one major issue, but I've already written about it, so I don't want to go too much in detail. I wrote about it, and I wrote to the Union Finance Minister. More importantly, my Chief Minister has written. And I've said publicly, which I'll say again, I don't think the GST Council, I don't think the Union government wants it on their conscience, the implications that would befall some of the states were they to cut the compensation completely. Now, a state like Tamil Nadu, we hedged ourselves a couple of ways. We went and made sure that there's a significant amount of dues that were pending by, let's say, the end of last fiscal year. We purposely went and asked them, please push it into 22-23 so that there won't be a big gap in the kind of payment flow. We also got some, as you know, I started this reconciliation project, I'm sure you've heard of it, where I went looking for unused funds and so forth. And we found a bunch of money. And so far, I've not accounted any of it back onto the balance sheet. So I've built myself some cushion on behalf of the Chief Minister, on behalf of the government. But many states don't have such a cushion. So I think that's going to be a very difficult issue. But I go back to one point that I hope most people kind of see as the primary point. Yes, I agree that the conception of the GST was not that great. I agree that the design and the implementation was even worse still. But my primary concern today is that the system doesn't function with any competence. Forget about the design, forget about the implementation. What is supposed to happen right now? The council is supposed to meet every 3 months. Does it? No. The council should have, at my request, I said, please give us at least 2 weeks notice so that we can all plan. We're not all guys without day jobs, women without day jobs. We have to plan. For the first time in at least the time that I've known, we got a notice with almost 2 weeks to go before the date of the meeting. Then the meeting was scheduled. The first notice said it will be held in Srinagar. Then 36 hours later, we got a meeting saying, no, it's going to be held in Chandigarh. We still don't know where the location of the meeting is. Then today I have received an agenda, which is part 1 of the agenda, which is 260 pages. Now, if the past is any record, over the next 10 days or so, or 7 days to the meeting, I will continue to get bits and pieces of agenda going up till like 12 hours before the meeting. How is a member supposed to apply their mind if they get hundreds of pages of agenda with such little time to process, when we are all, by definition, we are members only because we have jobs as ministers in the state governments, right? Or union governments. So we have day jobs that we're looking at. And so the implementation, the execution of it, the daily management of this GST is so lacking, is so unprofessional by any kind of corporate standards, is so, void of kind of attention and continuity. That, I think, is the first thing we can fix. We may have ideological differences, we may have design differences and all that. But if we can just make the system work more professionally, actually do the job it's supposed to do, actually meet every 3 months. This meeting is coming at the end of 6 months. The last emergency meeting with a one-point agenda was in December 31st, so that doesn't really count. The real full meeting of this GST Council with a full agenda was last in September. That means you're looking at 9 months. The design calls for it to meet every once in 3 months. How does it only meet once in 9 months? How much attention to pay? This is about the largest revenue stream to the whole country of India, right? This year it will be close to 20 lakh crores. If something that produces 20 lakh crores does not even warrant a meeting every 3 months, then I'm not sure, what the priority of the government is, of the union government is.
So I understand that you're questioning the execution and implementation of GST. So, but again, Finance Minister, sticking on to this GST compensation payouts the states have been asking for. So, the government has, just thinking from a federal government point of view, so you get to see this dollar. The federal government has already said that they're going to allocate $26 billion, as a part of its inflation fighting plan, which is going to lead to heavy borrowing and at the same time, widening the fiscal deficit to 6.8% from 6.4%. Don't you think these calls by the opposition parties, I'm not really sure what the stance of the TN government there, but don't you think by the Kerala and the Odisha government, this is going to sort of exacerbate the already, the Indian economy, which is slightly coming into recovery from a pandemic-induced slump, rather than smoothing the tensions in the economy?
It's fair to require or request unlimited borrowing at the union. And I also agree that there is potentially a free ride to problem if the states allow the union to do the heavy lifting and don't do what they need to do to get to 14%. But as you know, the bulk of this compensation, or at least eventually all of it, comes from the GST cess. Whether the cess continues for 5 years or 3 years or 8 years, I would say that were I in the Union Finance Minister's shoes, I would at least consider a short-term extension for 2 reasons. One, we should get a huge bounce in the GST revenues, as they've been saying every month, new highs, new highs. Of course, every month you should see new highs with the effect of inflation and the scale of the economy. But we're seeing, I think, possibly a recovery effect as well from the depth of going down, for the pandemic. And the second is that, if things go right, then you should find that the low base effect also helps the states. And you can modify the formula a little bit, maybe instead of 14% compounded going back 6 or 7 years, you set a new baseline and from there you give a new number. So if it was me, I would try to find some interim solution to work around, because I know some states will be desperately affected. Again, I say as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, though it's not the greatest thing, we can live with it because we have pre-planned and we have put some provisions in place.
Okay, so I think talking about this, GST Council isn't the only sort of a controversy between the state and center. The tussle between the states and center is kind of the controversy between the states and the center, the tussle between the states and center is kind of not new with the GST alone. We have seen in the past the need, for example, in Tamil Nadu, so to the NEP or even the national monetization pipeline. So I mean, the states accusing the center of sucking up a lot of power from the states, while the Prime Minister asking the states to abide by the very idea of cooperative federalism. So I mean, don't you think these issues are getting more political than actually economics?
Yeah, I don't want to get sucked into this kind of memoryless discussion, right? For those who have any memory, the greatest proponent of states' rights in the history of independent India was Thiru Narendra Modi, the then Chief Minister of Gujarat for 13 years. Not a single thing I have said on behalf of states' rights in the last year and a half since I took office has been further ahead on the spectrum of states' rights than Thiru Narendra Modi. I've been always behind him. He was far more strident and aggressive in asking for states' rights and asking for independent decision-making and the constitution to be enforced than I have ever been. So as far as I'm concerned, just because the rest of the media seems to be memoryless and take whatever he says now at face value without asking him the basic question, how did you change your position 180 degrees? Your seat changed from Chief Minister to Prime Minister. All of a sudden you've forgotten that states exist. That question should be asked to him. Our position has been consistent through the history of the Dravidian movement. We have always been for local self-governance. And that requires devolution not only from the union to the states, from the states to the districts and the local bodies. We follow that principle. And our consistency means that I don't have to go and keep kind of re-explaining why. Those that change their positions, especially if they change their positions 180 degrees, they should explain why. The logic for whatever we are asking is embedded in the Constitution and has been stated by the current Prime Minister hundreds of times when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat. I'll leave it at that.
All right, Finance Minister. Okay, shifting focus to what's happening in the state of Tamil Nadu. The state has been doing remarkably well, and also credits to you. And in terms of the Human Development Index and the Social Development Index, but the most important, the Gini coefficient for today's times. So, but what exactly is going on in the FDIs? There seems to be a lot of trips the Chief Minister has done in recent times. Went to the UAE. You've gotten onto a lot of trips to the US, the UK, and Australia. So, what's the state is at number 5 position when it comes to FDI investments, and what's the Salda administration doing to make Tamil Nadu the next investment capital?
Yeah, I think in this fiscal year, I don't think we're number 5. I think we may be number 1, but at any rate, we are the fastest growing. I think we have a 40% increase year over year in the last few months. And last year also, we had, I think, a 40% increase over the year before that. And that's not just the pandemic recovery effect, because that's disproportionate to the level for India as a whole. So, investors, I'll put it another way. There is a huge move to India kind of wave in the global economy right now, in supply chains, in services, in support, in every way. There's actually a significant move towards India going on right now. What Tamil Nadu is doing is riding its natural advantages within that wave, right? So we, of course, relative to other parts of the country, we have many advantages, starting with those you mentioned, high social and human development index, lower Gini coefficient, therefore a large market, 80 million people scale with high purchasing power. I mean, that comes with some negatives in waste generation and power and electricity and all that. But on the positives, there's all these things. And we have geographic advantages, large coastline, multiple airports, good infrastructure, roads per square kilometer, so forth. So I would say that the CM has only made 1 trip, and that was to Dubai. I have made 2 or 3 trips, some at the invitation of other governments, some on my own, some more in personal capacity. But I would say there's such a huge demand, particularly for long-term infrastructure, green energy, environmental sustainable goals type of investment. There's a huge amount of money around the world that is looking for these kinds of project opportunities and investment opportunities, and also in kind of higher end services, innovation, fintech, those kinds of things. And I think, it'll be, see, every time there's a huge wave, both ways. Every time there's a huge negative, every time there's a huge positive, or an asymptotic sudden turn. You will find that the better off get better off, and the less well off get worse off. That's basically what everything does. Crises and opportunities. Some will benefit more and others will benefit less. And therefore, it's the job of the government actually to kind of keep the strata together. But this has been true if you look back, and though we'd like to take credit for some things, the broader benefits of Tamil Nadu go back 100 years to the Justice Party government of 1921, where they started us down a path of inclusive growth, of communal geo reservations, of compulsory elementary education at that time for boys and girls, of equality for women, giving them the right to vote, etc. So that kind of ability to keep a cohesive society together, both harmonious in terms of not having fights for religion or caste, mostly, we much less than the average, let's say, around the country, but also economically, where everybody felt included in the uplift, and therefore you didn't have that many disgruntled people, or people, where you had communities that were wholly left behind. That 100 years of legacy, to be fair, across all parties, not just the DMK, not just the ADMK, not just the Justice Party or the Swatantra Party, even the Congress Party that ran governments in Madras Presidency and Madras State, hewed much more closely to this kind of inclusive ideal than, let's say, the Congress party of the rest of India in those days. I'm saying 30s and 50s and stuff like that. So those advantages will last us a long time. And that's the, the overriding public policy lesson is if you do the core things right, those are sustainable advantages over decades. If you make sure everybody gets educated, if you make sure women get equal access to education, to employment, to property rights, to safety, if you make sure that all communities and castes have access to all types of jobs, then you do that well for 10, 20, 30 years, and that's a sustainable advantage to catch up, unfortunately. That's what you see, right? You see that the gap between, let's say, the Hindi belt and the south, in particular Tamil Nadu, keeps increasing, keeps widening, keeps accelerating in its widening, despite every finance commission taking more and more money from Tamil Nadu and giving more and more of it to the UPs and Bihars and underdeveloped states of the world, of the country. And still the gap not only doesn't narrow, not only doesn't stabilize, not only widens, but accelerates in its widening. And I think if you don't do some basic things right, like particularly what I said about inclusion, about women, about empowerment, then no matter how much money you transfer, you're not seeing the effects of that in development.
It's a world of instant gratification. It's a world of startups, and when you say startups, it's tech startups. So what's the state government doing to sort of improve the startup ecosystem in the state of Tamil Nadu? Because we've seen a recent ranking. The city of Chennai ranks 102nd position in the world, and I think while it has improved a lot in terms of ranking the last 1 year by a 30 rank jump, but it's still not into the 100. It's still Bengaluru that's the startup capital of India. So what's the state government doing to foster these aspiring young entrepreneurs?
Yeah, we're doing many things, but I'll highlight probably 3 or 4. The first is we created a new entity called the Tamil Nadu Seed Investment Management Corporation, appointed a former venture capitalist as the CEO of that, set up an ecosystem around him, and the government itself is going to invest in startups and encourage them by providing shared services, mentoring, connectivity to funders, etc. The second specific thing I would say is that under the Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Fund Management Corporation, which I've taken over as chairman 6 months, investment fund called the Seed Investment Fund, and there we're going to do hundreds of crores at least of investment into startups, particularly startups. In fact, just today our new chief investment officer joined in that entity. And the third, which I tweeted about 2-3 days ago, we have so many startups in Tamil Nadu that build products and deliver services that are so innovative, but the government of Tamil Nadu itself can benefit from. So last November, I saw an event, and after that, I stated an intent to the chief minister that the government should procure directly from these startups in drone technology, in automated cooking, in robotics, in in fintech. The government should be a direct procurer, and that is a win-win-win because it gets us innovative services we can't get anywhere else. It helps the company with proof of concept, and the fact that you have the government of Tamil Nadu as a buyer greatly increases the likelihood that the company can sell to others, and it provides kind of an impetus and growth and jobs and so forth. So I announced it, we announced in the budget, we amended the tender rules so that up to 50 lakhs of purchases. Because see, by the very nature of startups, they don't have a track record and there's not 10 other companies doing what they're doing. So the normal tender rules saying you have to have minimum X bids and you have to have minimum Y qualification of that will clearly knock out the startups. So we changed the tender rules to allow up to 50 lakhs, and we are now going to run 1 or 2 a month where startups apply to present to a department of Tamil Nadu, whether it's the energy department or last month it was the social welfare department or the agriculture department or the urban administration department. And through a process of mutual matching, last week we had out of 100 and something applicants, 25 companies were given the chance over one full day to pitch directly to the department officers, and we expect to see a bunch of contracts come out of it. So this way we want to encourage startups because, the government of Tamil Nadu is a big buyer, right? Our annual budget is about, I don't know, $50 billion or more. And take away all the fixed costs, we still have, I don't know, non-compulsory spending or discretionary spending of probably 30-40% of that, which is a lot of money. So we can certainly encourage people who bring new technologies, who bring other things to the table. I'm sorry. Okay. Other things to the table and give them encouragement and get our youngsters involved with improving the lives of our people.
Very, very interesting, Finance Minister. Rahul Gandhi had tweeted a couple of weeks back and he said that India looks a lot more like Lanka. He cherry-picked a few figures and put out on Twitter. You and your party have a very strong alliance and a coalition government there in Tamil Nadu, and also in the center a couple of years back. But do you endorse Rahul Gandhi's statement on this?
I'm sorry, what did he say it looks a lot like? I lost track. What did he say?
He said India looks a lot more like Lanka. He quoted what's happening in the situation, the economic situation in Lanka, and he said India looks a lot more like Lanka.
Lanka. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, listen, I'm on the record on this as well. I mean, yes and no, right? I agree that when you have concentration of power without a democratic process, without checks and balances, you are going down the wrong path, right? I agree. But I would say the difference between Sri Lanka and India is that Sri Lanka is a tiny country by size relative to India. I don't know, 20, 25 million people, about a third of Tamil Nadu, and about, I don't know, less than 2% or maybe 2% of the size of India, and a relatively homogeneous economy. And so the odds of a crisis hitting are much higher in a place like Sri Lanka. So I don't think that we are at risk, in my opinion. I don't think we're at risk in the short term of that kind of dramatic collapse in the economy. But I agree with the principle. See, the whole nature of democracy is designed for debate, for a million voices to be heard, for the wisdom of everybody's input to shape the outcome. Not for anybody to do it sitting in their room and having their 2 advisors or 5 people, not to do things that even the cabinet of the country is not aware of and no input into. So this notion of somehow having a all-knowing, all-seeing kind of, close to God personality that can never do any wrong. This is a fallacy. No human being is like that, right? However educated, however experienced we are, we realize how much more we don't know, right? And how much more support we need, and how many more people we have to gather around us. Look at the government of Tamil Nadu. Most people would say there's very few finance ministers, at least in Tamil Nadu, maybe in the country, that have a more solid grounding in finance than me, both in terms of education and in terms of experience in global markets, in international banks, so forth. What do? The first thing we come to office, we appoint a bunch of really smart people to be our global economic advisors, from different perspectives, from different cultures, from different universities, Nobel Prize winner, because we understand the value of advice. We don't say, oh, we're so smart, we're so equipped, we should take every decision ourselves, right? So there's a fundamentally different policy that the nature of democracy and the nature of wisdom coalesce around that the more voices are heard, the more debate there is, the more perspectives of divergence are integrated into the final decision, the better the outcome. That is not happening in this country, and that's the sad part.
One last question, Finance Minister, before you go. So, we've been hearing a lot of models, the Gujarat model, the UP model, sometimes it's a Kerala model, but what exactly is a Dravidian model? So, could you just tell us for our viewers what it is?
Yeah, listen, the Dravidian model is very simple. It first starts with self-respect. Self-respect means we don't want social hierarchy. Nobody and no history tells us that some people are here, some people are here, some people are here, some people are kind of, to be ostracized and all that. So self-respect, all human beings are created equal. If that is the basis, then you start from there and say that people should be given equal opportunity to succeed. An equal opportunity to succeed comes from education, and kind of job opportunities based on the percentage of the population they are. So, kind of education for all and reservation to ensure that those who have been historically oppressed kind of get greater likelihood of the same seat, because you have to make up for their decades or centuries or millennia of oppression. Then you say, if people have self-respect and have education, they should have the right to self-determination. So you say, let's get more and more local self-government and devolve powers from the union to the state, down to the district, down to the local bodies. And effectively, you say, what you really want is inclusive growth. Every part of your society participates. You keep the highs and lows restricted. You don't allow somebody to get too rich, and you don't allow anybody to fall behind. You provide subsidies. You provide free food, free uniforms, free cycles, free laptops, whatever it takes to make sure the bottom has a chance to get to the top. And you measure your progress not just by per capita GDP, but by things like Human Development Index, by Social Development Index, by Gini coefficient being low, by mobility. Is it possible that my driver's son gets to go to the same school that my son goes? Then, being a child of privilege, then I have a successful outcome. So it is a very simple, in today's world, we call it social justice, inclusive growth. But these terms were not that common. They were not in daily parlance in a global context. They were in daily parlance in the Dravidian model, going back to the formation of the Justice Party, otherwise known as the South Indian Liberal Federation, back in 1916, and its first government in 1921. So it's a very simple model. It says everybody's equal, everybody needs education, you get ahead through education, everybody should get equal opportunity or reserved opportunities based on fact that some people start at a different historical low compared to others, and you kind of allow for a harmonious and cohesive society. And that's the model. I mean, there's other aspects of it, but that's the core model.
The harmonious and the cohesive society, that's the Dravidian model. Thank you very much, Finance Minister. It was nothing less than riveting talking to you, and a pleasure to have you here on Livement. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.